The fire wasn't natural. It wasn't an accident. That was the first thing I realized as I stood in the mansion's suffocating foyer, watching shadows twist and crawl like living things across the walls. The air burned hotter inside than out, and somewhere deep in the house, something was laughing. A guttural, bone-chilling sound that didn't belong to anything human. We thought we were looters, scavengers taking advantage of LA's chaos. We didn't know we were walking into a trap. This wasn't just any house. It was alive, and it wanted us there. It had waited for us, for the fire to swallow the city, for the perfect moment to unleash whatever unholy thing had been sealed within its walls. I wanted to run, but the fire had other plans. It was alive too, roaring with a sinister hunger, trapping us in its blazing jaws. And at the heart of it all, the demon stood, smiling. This wasn't just a wildfire, it was the devil's wildfire. I never thought I'd come back to Los Angeles, let alone during the wildfires. The city always felt suffocating, a sprawling, smog-choked graveyard for people like me, kids who thought they could make it big, only to drown in the endless tide of ambition and disappointment. Dropping out of college wasn't my first choice, but it felt inevitable. I was tired of pretending I knew what I was doing. Now, standing in the orange haze of the fires, the air thick with ash and desperation, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made the right call. "Come on, Anthony," Malik had said when he called me 2 nights ago. His voice carried the same reckless charm that had gotten me into trouble more times than I could count back in high school. "We've got a plan, man. Big score. No one's gonna miss a few rich people's trinkets. They've got insurance, you know?" I'd laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking. But Malik had a way of talking you into things, making you feel like his schemes weren't just plans, they were opportunities. And truthfully, I needed one. Rent was due, my car was on its last leg, and my pride wouldn't let me crawl back to my parents in Phoenix with my tail between my legs. 2 days later, I found myself standing at the edge of a gated community in the hills, watching Malik and 2 of his boys, Diego and Kenny, load up their gear. I hadn't seen Diego or Kenny in years, but they looked exactly the same as they had back in high school. Diego had that wiry, restless energy that made you think he was always one wrong word away from snapping, while Kenny was more reserved, his heavy frame moving with deliberate, almost lumbering precision. The fires weren't close yet, but their heat seemed to seep into everything. The air reeked of smoke and chemicals, and every breath felt like swallowing sand. The sky was an ominous shade of orange, and the distant crackle of flames was a constant reminder of how little time we had. "You good, bro?" Malik asked, clapping me on the shoulder. He was grinning, his teeth white against the ash smudged across his face. Malik always looked like he belonged in chaos, like he thrived in it. His hoodie was pulled low over his forehead, and the bulging backpack slung across his shoulders made him look more like a soldier than the kid I used to know. Yeah, I muttered, adjusting the straps on my own bag. "Just wondering why we're out here when half the city's already been evacuated." "Because this," Malik said, gesturing toward the gate in front of us, "is where the real money is. Rich folks' second homes, vacation pads, they've all cleared out. You can smell it, right? Opportunity." Diego and Kenny laughed, their voices sharp and hollow against the stillness. I forced a smile and nodded, though the sinking feeling in my gut hadn't gone away. Something about this felt wrong, not just the looting, though that was bad enough. It was the way the air seemed thicker here, heavier, like we were standing at the edge of something we weren't supposed to cross. "All right," Malik said, pulling a crowbar from his bag. "Let's move. Diego, cut the lock. Kenny, keep watch. Anthony, you're with me." The lock fell with a metallic clatter, and we slipped through the gate, our footsteps muffled by the ash-dusted pavement. The mansion loomed ahead of us, its sleek, modern lines stark against the glowing backdrop of fire and smoke. It looked untouched, its pristine white facade almost glowing in the dim light. It didn't make sense. Every house we'd passed on the way up had been scorched or abandoned, yet this one stood unscathed, as if the fire had deliberately spared it. "Yo," Diego whispered as we approached the front door. "You guys recognize this place?" "What?" Malik asked, already jamming the crowbar into the doorframe. "This is Diddy's house," Diego said, his voice low. "You know, like Sean Combs' Diddy." "No way," Kenny said, glancing over his shoulder. "Why would he leave this place unlocked?" "He didn't," Malik said, grunting as he pried the door open. "But now it is. Let's go." The door creaked open, revealing a cavernous foyer lit only by the dim glow of the outside fires. The air inside was cool, almost cold, and carried a faint metallic tang that made my skin crawl. The marble floors were polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the flickering light from outside, and a massive chandelier hung overhead, its crystals catching the faint light and scattering it like broken glass. "This place is insane," Diego said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He wandered toward a set of double doors on the left, his crowbar dangling loosely at his side. "Bet there's some crazy stuff in here." "Stay focused," Malik said, his voice sharp. "We're in and out, 20 minutes. Grab whatever looks valuable and keep moving. No messing around." The others scattered, their footsteps fading as they disappeared into the labyrinth of rooms beyond the foyer. I hesitated, my eyes drawn to a massive painting that hung on the wall above the staircase. It depicted a sprawling cityscape engulfed in flames, the figures in the foreground twisted in agony as they tried to escape the inferno. It was hauntingly detailed, the colors so vivid it felt like the fire was real. "Anthony!" Malik's voice snapped me out of my trance. He was already halfway up the staircase, motioning for me to follow. I nodded and hurried after him, though the painting's image lingered in my mind like an afterimage burned into my retina. We moved through the house in silence, our footsteps muffled by the plush carpets. Each room we entered was more extravagant than the last. Gold accents, custom furniture, artwork that probably cost more than my entire education. But there was something off about it all. The house felt too quiet, too still, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Check this out," Malik said, stopping in front of a heavy wooden door at the end of a long hallway. It was carved with intricate patterns, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore. Malik pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit study lined with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. "Damn," I muttered, stepping inside. The air in the room was different, denser, almost electric. Malik was already rifling through the desk drawers, muttering curses under his breath as he searched for anything worth taking. I wandered toward the bookshelves, my fingers brushing against the spines of old leather-bound volumes. One book in particular caught my eye. Its cover was plain, its leather cracked and faded, but something about it drew me in. I pulled it from the shelf and flipped it open, revealing pages filled with dense, handwritten text. The language was unfamiliar, the letters twisting and curling in ways that made my head ache if I stared too long. "Yo, Anthony, look at this." Malik's voice was tight, his usual bravado replaced by something sharper. Fear, maybe. I turned to see him holding a stack of papers, their edges singed and brittle. He handed them to me, and I scanned the top page, my stomach sinking as I read the scrawled words. The fire is not a cleansing force, but a summoning. Through its heat, the path is opened. I looked up at Malik, the words choking in my throat. "What is this?" "I don't know," he said, his voice low, "but we need to get out of here." For once I agreed with him. But as we turned to leave, the lights in the room flickered, and a low, guttural sound echoed through the house. It wasn't a voice exactly, but it felt like one, something ancient and angry. "What was that?" Malik hissed, his eyes darting toward the doorway. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stand there clutching the book and the papers as the sound grew louder, reverberating through the walls like the house itself was groaning. "Anthony!" Malik said, grabbing my arm. We need to move, now. We stumbled into the hallway, the sound following us like a predator stalking its prey. The air felt thicker now, almost suffocating, and the walls seemed closer, the shadows deeper. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a scream, a sharp, piercing sound that was cut off as abruptly as it had begun. Diego, Malik whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I didn't think Diego was coming back. The hallway twisted and stretched endlessly before us, every turn leading deeper into an impossible labyrinth. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I couldn't stop, not when the shadows behind us seemed to crawl and grow with every passing second. Finally, we stumbled into a large, open room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the fiery hills outside. For a brief moment, hope surged in my chest. The windows were large enough to climb through, and the fire outside seemed distant enough to make a run for it. Malik, the windows, I shouted, pointing. But Malik didn't respond. He was staring at something in the center of the room, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. I turned to see what had frozen him in place and felt my blood turn to ice. In the center of the room stood a figure, tall and impossibly thin, its skin as black as coal and its eyes glowing like embers. It grinned at us, its sharp teeth glinting in the faint light. Then slowly, it raised one long bony arm and waved. The gesture was eerily human, almost friendly, but its smile was anything but. It was a predator's grin, sharp and full of malice. Malik, I whispered, my voice trembling. We need to go. Malik didn't move. His knuckles were white as he gripped the crowbar, his entire body locked in place as the figure took a single, deliberate step toward us. Still smiling, it waved again. Malik, I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the windows. Move! The spell broke and Malik stumbled after me. Together we smashed through the glass and tumbled out onto the hillside. The ground was hot and dry, the air thick with ash and smoke, but I didn't care. We were outside. We were free. We scrambled down the hill, the jagged rocks and dry brush tearing at our clothes. Behind us, the house loomed against the fiery skyline, its windows glowing faintly. I glanced back only once and wished I hadn't. The figure was standing in the broken window, its grin still fixed in place as it waved at us one final time. Then it stepped back into the shadows, disappearing from view. The road felt endless as we ran, our lungs burning from the smoke-laden air. Every step away from the mansion felt like pulling against an invisible tether. A part of me swore it wanted to drag us back. Malik was a few paces ahead, moving in frantic bursts, his crowbar swinging loosely in his grip. I clutched the book and the brittle papers against my chest, their weight far heavier than they should have been. We stumbled onto a dirt path, illuminated faintly by the glow of the fires in the distance. For the first time, the city below came into view, its skyline hazy and blurred by smoke. The sight should have been a relief, a sign that we were close to safety, but it wasn't. The fire wasn't just burning in the hills, it was creeping closer, the orange flames devouring the edges of the city like a living thing. Keep moving, I said, though my voice came out hoarse and weak. I wasn't even sure Malik could hear me. He stopped suddenly, doubling over as he gasped for air. His hoodie was soaked with sweat, ash sticking to his skin in streaks. What the hell was that? He panted, his voice trembling. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. The memory of the figure, the way it had waved, the way its grin seemed to stretch too wide, was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching us, even now. We left them, Malik said, his voice breaking. Diego, Kenny, we just left them. They're gone, I said flatly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. You saw what that thing was. They didn't make it out. No, Malik said, shaking his head. No, you don't know that. We have to go back. We can't just... We're not going back, I snapped, louder than I intended. The force of it startled both of us. You want to go back there? Be my guest. But you saw what that thing did. What it is. If we go back, We'll end up just like them. Malik stared at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might charge back toward the mansion in some desperate, futile attempt to save them. But then his shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. My hands tightened around the book, its cracked leather cover rough against my palms. Something about it felt significant, like it held the key to understanding what had happened back there. But the thought of opening it, of looking at those twisting, incomprehensible letters again, sent a shiver down my spine. "We keep moving," I said finally. "We get as far from here as we can." Malik nodded, though his expression was vacant. He turned and started walking down the path, his movements sluggish and mechanical. I followed, glancing back over my shoulder one last time. The mansion was barely visible now, shrouded in smoke and shadow. But in the faint glow of the fires, I thought I saw something. A tall, thin silhouette standing in one of the broken windows, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I didn't stop to look closer. I couldn't. The smoke was choking, the heat unbearable. My legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. Malik was beside me, stumbling more than running, his crowbar dragging against the cracked asphalt. The world around us was a blur of fire and destruction, the flames towering over the houses like giants. It felt endless, as if we were running in place, the fire consuming everything behind us and pushing us forward. Then, through the haze, I saw them, figures in heavy gear, their yellow suits almost glowing in the inferno. Firefighters. They were moving in a tight group, their axes and hoses cutting through the chaos. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, my oxygen-starved brain conjuring up hope where there was none. But then one of them shouted, his voice muffled by his mask. "Over here! We've got 2 survivors!" Malik collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. "We're alive," he gasped, his voice barely audible. The firefighters reached us in seconds, their gloved hands pulling us to our feet. "Can you walk?" one of them asked, his voice firm but kind. I nodded, though my body screamed in protest. "There are 2 more, I managed, my throat raw. "Diego and Kenny, they were with us." The firefighter exchanged a look with his partner. "We found 2 men earlier," he said. "They're in the safe zone. You'll see them soon." The relief hit me like a wave, almost knocking me over. Diego and Kenny were alive. Somehow they'd made it out. The firefighters ushered us through the streets, the fire roaring behind us. I clutched the book tightly against my chest, its weight grounding me in the chaos. I didn't know why I hadn't left it behind, why I couldn't. Every instinct told me to get rid of it, to throw it into the flames and let it burn, but something about it wouldn't let me go. We reached the edge of the neighborhood where a convoy of fire trucks and emergency vehicles waited. Medics rushed to meet us, guiding us toward an ambulance. I saw Diego and Kenny sitting on the back bumper of a fire truck, their faces streaked with ash but otherwise unharmed. Diego looked up as we approached, his expression unreadable. "You made it," he said, his voice flat. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure how. Malik slumped onto the ground beside the ambulance, his head in his hands. "It's over," he muttered. "It's finally over." But it wasn't. Not really. As the medics checked us over, I glanced back at the neighborhood, at the towering inferno that had consumed everything we'd left behind. And then I saw it. The figure stood in the middle of the flames, its coal black body silhouetted against the fire, its burning eyes locked onto mine, and a slow, deliberate smile spread across its face. It raised one long, bony arm and waved. "Anthony," Malik said, his voice trembling. "What are you looking at?" I blinked, and the figure was gone. The flames roared on, but the street felt empty now, the fire just fire again. I shook my head, my hands trembling. "Nothing," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The drive away from the neighborhood was silent. Malik sat beside me in the ambulance, staring blankly out the window. Diego and Kenny were in another vehicle, their faces pale and their eyes haunted. None of us spoke. There was nothing to say. As we left the burning neighborhood behind, I couldn't stop thinking about the mansion, about the fire, about the figure that had smiled and waved as if it knew something I didn't. I felt the book pressing against my side, a constant unwelcome reminder of what we'd seen, what we'd done. I thought about my decisions, about the moment I'd answered Malik's call and agreed to come back to this cursed city. How many chances had I ignored to walk away? How many times had I chosen the easy path, the selfish path, only to end up here, haunted and broken? This was my fault, I whispered, the words barely audible. Malik turned to me, his expression blank. What? All of it, I said, my voice shaking. If I'd just said no, if I'd stayed in Phoenix, none of this would have happened. Malik didn't respond. He just stared at me for a long moment, then turned back to the window. When I got back to the shelter that night, I wrote down everything, every detail I could remember, every mistake I'd made. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought it would help me process it, to make sense of the madness. Maybe I just needed to let it out before it consumed me. But as I finished typing the last sentence, I knew one thing for certain. I was done with Los Angeles. Done with the city, the fire, the mansion. Done with everything that had brought me to this point. As soon as I post this, I'm applying to go back to school. No more shortcuts, no more bad decisions, no more chasing easy money or stupid schemes. I'm going to finish my degree, find a real job, and build a life worth living. And I swear on everything I have left, I will never come back to Los Angeles. Not ever. Because the fire might be gone, but the mansion is still out there. And I know, deep down, it's waiting.